All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Nordics MUG. Today's session is about deliverability. I am one of your MUG hosts. I'm Veronica. Some on this call might know that I started my Marketo journey in Copenhagen about, 7-8 years ago. Today, I lead the marketing ops team at a company called Alma. Alma is a US company operating in the mental health care space, and we are connecting therapists with consumers. Just because we're recording, I want to say that we have a really good deliverability rate, Sean.
Awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, apart from that, I love the community. I geek a lot in Marketo, and I'm excited to be here with everyone. Michael, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Michael Knudsen. So I'm from the inside of the fence. So I'm from the Adobe side. I'm part of the Nordic sales team, and my focus is around Marketo and customer journey management in general. And I started the user group here along with Veronica. I guess it's a few years back now. And run this as a side project, let's call it that. So nothing that's relevant for my work, but something that is relevant for my interest. I've worked as a Marketo user at my previous company, which was called Episerver, which is now called Optimizely. And that's where kind of my interest was sparked. So yeah, that's me. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, this is me.
And we have Sean here today, which we're so excited. He accepted our invite to speak at the MUG. He has a ton of experience that he is just willing to share with us. And I would love for Sean to introduce himself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yep, I'm Sean Wirt. As the slide says, 20 years experience in the deliverability space. Kind of fell into it like everyone else in the email deliverability space as I was working at AOL, America Online, years ago. Since I've worked at a couple of ESPs and an email tools provider before joining Marketo just about 6 years ago. So I've been with Adobe since the Marketo acquisition. So love talking to clients, love speaking to MUGs. We have a MUG here in Charlotte. I try to go whenever I can. Not so much recently as I would like, but hope to get back there soon. But looking forward to speaking with you all today.
Thank you. And in terms of the agenda, I will cover a few housekeeping items. We're gonna briefly mention the summit that's happening next week. Sean will take most of the time talking about deliverability. As you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we will take those at the end. I'll give an update on certifications and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. Okay, so I'll let you read this one. Okay, so these are a few rules set from Adobe side to make sure this space is first and foremost for the users. Please don't share things outside or contact people without consent. For those who join a little later, we are recording this MUG. We want all the people who heard about deliverability but now working directly to see this MUG. So we're going to share the recording on our MUG page after the session. And we are the Nordics MUG based in Denmark. If you are not part of our chapter, please go to mugs.marketo.com, where you'll find we have a dedicated page. We are 57 there now, which is incredible. Not only from Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, but also from other countries here in Europe. We need to make the community bigger. So please join us. Every time we post a new event, you will get an email, which will be delivered to your inbox. Okay.
And Summit is coming up for those of you that are interested in that. Summit is it should have been our yearly event that has happened every year, but it's been on pause the last couple of years and been mainly focused on the virtual content, which I hope some of you have taken advantage of. The next event that's going to happen is here in March in Las Vegas. Not a lot of us are lucky enough to be able to go to that, at least from this end of the pond, or this side of the pond, let's use that term. But luckily enough, we will have one in June also here in EMEA in London. June 8th and 9th is customer focused. There is actually a day on the 7th, which is a partner day specifically. So for those of you that are interested in that's a good one to note down. It'll be, as you can see, in person and virtual, and there's going to be a myriad of different speakers. There's not a huge amount of content for the program in London yet, but that is growing daily. But if you do want to see some of the virtual content that's coming out from the Vegas event, you can actually already now go online to summit.adobe.com and actually have a look at some of those pieces of content that's going to be there available through video conference later on. So a lot of cool content, a lot of it with Marketo and Marketo Measure in it, but of course also other aspects of the Adobe stack.
Yeah, I did register for on-demand sessions. I don't think they will be streamed in the same time as live, but they will be available the next day, so I can watch during my time. And the London Summit, I think as soon as we have more info, Michael and I will email our chapter members with more information.
Yeah. And the website is already up, so you can actually find it if you just search on Google. But as I mentioned, it's the content there is a little limited. There's quite a little amount of information to work with just yet, but it's coming. I'm sure.
Okay, let me go back to my slides. It's because it's linked, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Next one, more content. If you want to hear from other chapters of Marketo user groups, you can go to mug.marketo.com, where you'll find a calendar that tells you every month what's going on. So we can see other sessions in March, and we are the ones here. And feel free to join remotely. If you're in EMEA, let's say, you're welcome to join other virtual meetings from the US. I did that a lot during the pandemic. Nobody kicked me out, so yeah. Okay. With that said, Sean, all yours.
Great. Excellent. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining, especially those that may have joined after I spoke earlier. It's a pleasure to meet with you all. Deliverability always seems to be a hot topic. I've gotten a couple of requests recently to join groups and speak to them. And a lot of the questions really are around kind of deliverability basics. So I'm kind of making my rounds over the next couple of months or so to make sure everyone understands deliverability, reputation. Everyone thinks deliverability is a black box. It really isn't. But if everyone assumes that, and I know what's in the black box, then that makes my life a lot easier. But it's really, again, it's really not. It's not rocket science, but there is, there's a lot that goes into it. But I'm going to provide you with some kind of high level information about deliverability with some pointers along the way. Again, we've reserved some time at the end for questions, so feel free to kind of get those questions ready and shoot those in the chat, and we'll try to get as many of those answered as possible. So let's jump in. So one of the biggest, probably, if not the biggest factor in your overall deliverability, deliverability being kind of not just only whether or not your messages are delivered or not, but also, everything that touches email, your campaign when it launches. If you look at your delivered numbers in Marketo, it's really just one piece of the picture. So there are a lot of factors that come into play with regards to, if your messages are going to get delivered and how they're going to get delivered. Sorry. So reputation, again, is probably the key factor to whether or not your messages get delivered or not. There are really two aspects to reputation. There's your domain reputation. So really, actually, it could be two different domains or two subdomains. It can be the sending domain, that being the domain of the from address that you use as you're creating your content in Marketo. It could also be what we call the return path or the envelope from domain. That's a domain that's used kind of in the background. The email servers use to communicate back and forth to each other, the return path or envelope from domain. So at a high level, that return path envelope from domain, if you're on our shared IP pools, you're going to be sharing a domain there with everyone else on that shared IP pool. If you happen to have a dedicated IP address from us, then we'll set up a custom return path envelope from domain for you there. That leads me into the next aspect of reputation, which is your IP reputation. Let me back one quick. Is your IP reputation? That's the reputation of the IP addresses that are used to send mail. So at Marketo, the default setup for clients is IP reputation. So I mean, it's shared IPs. So that's you're on a pool of IPs with other Marketo clients sending mail out of all those same IPs. Or you can upgrade to a dedicated IP address. What that is that's where you have your own IP or IP addresses, where you're the only client that is sending mail out of that IP address. That would be an upgrade. And if you do purchase a dedicated IP, upgrade to a dedicated IP, then you'll be paired with someone from our team who will walk you through that entire process. All right. So with regards to reputation, there are 5 key drivers here, and we'll talk about each one of those individually after the slide. But there's the quality of your data, which is super, super important. There's the engagement level of your audience. There's managing your complaints, people reporting your messages as spam, your overall content strategy, and then, believe it or not, the infrastructure of that you use to send your mail out. So let's dive into these individually. First is data quality. You hear data quality a lot, but it's super, super important for your reputation. The way that you can control your data quality is through your acquisition strategy, making sure that the people you're sending to have given you permission to send mail to them. Especially for you guys, GDPR, could come into play here. Also, I mean, technically, if you Adobe's terms of service indicate that you are not allowed to send to people that haven't given you permission to do so ahead of time. So, buying a list and then just, blanket mailing out to those folks who haven't given you permission, technically a violation of our terms of service. So certainly be careful if that's part of your process. Invalid addresses, minimizing the number of bad addresses that you have in your database. If you attempt to deliver to those, we're going to mark those as invalid and you'll no longer send to them again. But just trying to keep them out of your database to begin with can be really helpful. Limiting the number of spam traps that you hit. Spam traps are addresses that are in your database that shouldn't be. There are legitimate reasons, I'd say, for them being in your database, but you really should get them out as soon as you can. Some traps are what we call recycled traps, and they're just really old addresses. It could be an old domain or an old address that maybe an ISP has repurposed as a spam trap, but you just don't want to have traps in your database. So limiting those is really important. Inactivity management, managing out people that haven't, or processing them out, people that haven't engaged with your email either ever or over a period of time. So at the very beginning of their life cycle, if you've sent them a handful of emails and you don't see any engagement activity from them at all, then just kind of cutting them loose could be helpful. And then if you're monitoring whether or not customers are, they've kind of stopped their activity at a certain point, it's really important you can help get those out too. Both of those, looking at that can also help to get or minimize the number of traps that are in your database. And then finally, your bounce management. We process the bounces as they come back in. We update the records to say that they're bounced. But the only thing that we do natively out of the instance with bounces is that we mark the invalid addresses as bounces, but things like hard bounces that are spam complaints or are spam blocks, and then any of the soft bounces, we don't do anything for you with them natively. So having a process in place, we certainly recommend you have a process in place for your hard bounce spam blocks as well as your soft bounces. So that's data quality. Engagement, which is quite possibly the #1 factor in determining your overall reputation. And this is really looking at whether or not people are indicating that they want to get your mail. That's really one of the factors that the ISPs or mailbox providers that you're mailing to, they want to get a sense from their audience, their customers, that the mail that you're sending to them is mail that they want to get. And the way that they do that is to look to see if you're opening the emails and if you're clicking on those emails once you do open them. It used to be in the early days of email, I call it the wild, wild west. As long as you had low bounce rates and low complaint rates, you could pretty much just, you have a decent reputation, you could just send whatever you wanted to. Of course, the spammers of the world, always keeping us on our feet, on our toes, figured out ways around this. One of the ways that they decided that they figured a way around this was, especially at the larger ISPs, they just would sign up or have, contractors or someone just sign up for hundreds, if not thousands of addresses at those providers, Hotmail, Gmail, to pad their stats. So these would be addresses that they owned. So they knew they were good addresses and they knew that no one would be complaining about them. They would just continually send mail to those mailboxes. They wouldn't bounce, they wouldn't get any complaints there. And so they had fairly good numbers there. So the ISPs, as they're monitoring their network, regularly looking through the mail that's getting through their filters and trying to adjust them, figured out that, hey, why are taking a look? Why is this mail? This is not mail that someone would willingly sign up for. How's this getting through the filters? They started looking at the mailboxes that were getting it, noticing that there was no engagement there. So they started really putting an emphasis on engagement. So it's super, super important to have a smaller, much more engaged audience and list than it is to have this huge list of people that aren't engaging. That's a topic that can really be hard, especially for upper management to understand. They just want to see a lot of mail going out, but if it's not high quality mail, it's not going to do you nearly as good as a much smaller, more engaged list. So keep that in mind. So getting permission is really important for your engagement. Segmenting your audience, sending them relevant content based on whatever factors it is, industry or location or job title, job level, any of those factors. And the overall subscriber experience, that's really important for reputation across the board. You'll see subscriber experience on a couple of these slides. That's just because a positive subscriber experience is really just going to give you a help to enhance your reputation. If the user experience is positive, then that user is going to be more engaged with your emails. So that's engagement. Next is complaint management. I mentioned just a minute ago that minimizing your complaints was important early on. Still important. We still don't want people complaining about the mail that you're sending to them. So keeping those spam reports low. And how can you do that? Through frequency. There's a fine line between sending too much mail and not sending enough. And so you want to stay relevant, but sending too much mail can, you can overload them with email, and they may just take the easy route and report the message as spam. We call that the lazy opt-out as well. Instead of just unsubscribing or whatever, clients know, they know that just hitting report spam button is going to prevent them from getting that mail from you any longer. So keeping that frequency low is, or at a, again, doing testing, trying to figure out where your sweet spot is can be really helpful. Setting and managing expectations up front, especially if you have a form where they're signing up to get your emails, let them know what to expect. This is what you'll be getting, giving them the option to make choices on what they want to get, but then also maintaining those expectations. So if you tell them they're going to get a weekly email, send them a weekly email. Don't send them three emails a week, just so that they know what they're going to get. And again, sticking to that. Consent and disclosure up front, again, getting that permission. And then finally, there's that subscriber experience again. If it's a positive subscriber experience, they're going to be less likely to report your message as spam. That's complaint management. Content strategy. Again, it's taking a look at that content, making sure, a lot of things, that it's relevant, the subscriber experience, those are, kind of known. Addressing the envelope, making sure that it's clear who that message is coming from, especially with the use of the friendly from. If you think about it, from a consumer standpoint, pretty much any mailbox that you have today, when you see who the mail is coming from, you're typically not going to see that full email address. You're typically going to see what's set up as the friendly from. So making sure that using that friendly from, it's really clear who that email is from, and customizing it. If you customize that friendly from with the content that you're sending, that can be helpful. Your subject lines, of course, short, attention grabbing. Subject lines are really helpful. Using that pre-header text, so that pops up in some of the inboxes. If you have our deliverability tools, the design and content section of it, there's a section on there where you can play around with your subject lines in various email clients. You can play with the header, the pretext header. You can put the friendly from in there, and then you can see how in the various email clients that email will appear. So that can be really useful as you're designing your content. Targeting and segmentation, again, sending that content that they want to get that's relevant to them. Also, image suppression, thinking about what your content's going to look like in the mailbox if the mailbox client doesn't default your images to on. So here at Adobe, we get emails from outside. Our images don't turn on by default. And also in our tools I mentioned earlier, the design and content section, there's one or two email clients in there where you can see what your email will look like as you're going through that design process, what the content will look like if the images don't default to on. It can be a really ugly, it can be a bad look. It could be an ugly user experience if you've got really big images, if you've got a bunch of images and mostly images and they don't render. So keeping that in mind as you're designing that content can be really impactful. That's content strategy. And then finally, the infrastructure, believe it or not, can also be as a factor in your overall reputation. First, there's the authentication. So as you're setting up your instance in Marketo, you add your from domain or domains or subdomains that you're going to send your mail from. In the admin panel, there's an SPF, DKIM tab, and email in the admin section. You add your domain or subdomains that all the ones you're going to be sending from in your instance. And then what happened is there's an SPF and a DKIM check in the tool itself. So what'll happen is you add the domain. As soon as you add it, you get a pop-up with your DKIM details. DKIM is domain keys identified mail. What happens there is that pop-up gives you all the information that your IT team needs to create a DKIM key in SPF. So you send that information to them. They publish the information into DNS, and then once that's done, you come back into Marketo. You click on that domain and you click to check the DNS, and then the tool goes out to make sure you've got your SPF record published, also that your DKIM key is published and it's published properly. Assuming that happens, then the status for both of those goes from pending to verified. And once it's verified, any domain that is sent, we SPF is we use SPF, and then we also sign with DKIM any of those domains. And so what happens is we sign the header and parts of the body of the email with this DKIM key, and then that key that your IT team published in DNS. If a receiving domain is checking DKIM, they see that it's been signed. They then go out to public DNS, make sure the keys match. If those keys match, then you typically have a better chance of your mail getting delivered to the inbox. If DKIM fails, so if you have a DKIM record but something fails there, then you might see the message go to spam. So that's one of the things that we will typically check as if we're trying to troubleshoot spam folder placement. We'll check that DKIM. If DKIM's failing there, then that's a pretty much an easy fix. If DKIM passed and you're still going to spam folder, that's a much deeper dive. So we might have to dig in deeper on that. Compliance management. We have a compliance team that manages our network. They have and especially on the, if you're on the shared IP side, they're looking to see, you know, are there IPs on any block lists? If so, digging in to find out who's the cause of those block listings, moving them out of the shared IP pool into what we call a quarantined IP pool, work with them to get their whatever practices they had that were causing them to get listed on that block list. And then once they've made changes and agreed to stick to those changes, then moving them back to the inbox. So that's kind of helping to maintain the reputation of those shared IPs that you'd be mailing from. And then finally is the technical setup of not only of your Marketo instance, but the mail servers that we use to send that mail. A couple factors in here. And a lot of this comes into play with reputation because it's really about respecting the resources of the servers that we're sending mail to. So if we're just trying to just slam as much mail as we can to a receiving mail server, then that can be detrimental. And you may see some blocks, you may see some throttling. But most of these domains, they have these settings that they would like everyone to adhere to. And some of like the major ISPs, most of them have what we call a postmaster webpage, and they will publish those settings out there for everyone to see. And those settings can be things like how many connections can we make to their mail servers. So believe it or not, as we're delivering mail, we can open multiple connections to their mail servers to deliver as much mail as we can, as fast as we can. So, but they might dictate how many connections they want us to open at a time, how many messages they want us to deliver per connection, per minute, per hour, things like that. So anywhere that we know that those settings are published, we can go in there to our servers and we can use what we call the configurable sending options. So we go in, we set those up, and hopefully things are gonna flow the way we want them to. We also have what's called adaptive delivery settings, and that's where our servers kind of learn over time what works and what doesn't. So, a lot of the domains, probably most of the domains out there that we send to, they don't publish these settings that they want us to adhere to. So we rely on our servers to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work, and to adjust kind of on the fly over time with what works. And so that can be really, really helpful. But also, if the adaptive delivery settings aren't working, we can go in and we can do the configurable send options again. So we can go in and we can say, you know what, things just aren't working with the configurable settings. Let's go in and make some changes here to the settings to get it to a point where we want it to work. So that's it on infrastructure. All right, we get a lot of questions too about how can I find my reputation? What about my sender score? So I wish this was an easy answer. So sender score is a service that was offered by a company called ReturnPath, and then ReturnPath was acquired by a company called Validity. So sender score is still out there. You can go to senderscore.org. You can put your IP address in there. It used to be your domain, but I think they've done away with the domain. That was kind of a temporary thing they tried out. Put your IPs in there and see what the score is. It can be anywhere from 0 to 100. Ideally, that would be great, right? Just go there, you know what your reputation is, and you can make changes based on it. The downfall there is that some of the ISPs will pull that data in as part of their reputation factoring, their algorithms, but it's not the only thing that they use. Especially the major ISPs, and then even the mail hosting providers like Office 365 and the Google Suite, and the mail filter providers like Barracuda, Proofpoint, Mimecast. They all have their own, kind of native reputation systems that pull in, different factors of reputation, hundreds, if not thousands of markers to help determine what that reputation is. In theory, they all kind of follow the same model, but of course they're going to be different. Different weights around different pieces of their algorithms can change. So that's why you can sometimes see spam folder placement at one ISP, but maybe not at another. So so again, sender score, if you go to sender score, you can get a score there, but again, it doesn't say anything about whether or not your mail is going to get delivered at at Google or Hotmail or Yahoo. So just keep that in mind. So you've got that out there. I didn't list that here, but for more specific information related to your delivery at a particular provider, there are some ISP tools. Google has what's called a Postmaster tool. You go to, I think it's google.com/postmaster, I think is the URL, and there are instructions there on how to start getting data from their tool. You can put in your IP addresses, you can put in your domains, and there is some DNS work that your IT team needs to do to set that up. But once that's up, you have a portal you can log into and get daily updates about what your reputation is at Google. At Gmail specifically. Now they say Gmail specifically. I've seen some data that indicates to me that they may be pulling in mail for their hosted domains. So the domains that, like, if you use like Gmail for your work mail, I've seen some data that indicates to me they may be pulling in some data from there as well. So just keep that in mind. Similarly, Microsoft has what's called a Smart Network Data Service, SNDS for short. This is IP-based. So if you're on our shared IP pool, not really an option for you. If we gave you access to that data, you'd see data from every other client in that shared IP pool. So we can't allow that. But if you're on our dedicated IPs, you can sign up to get that data, and then you'll start you have to log in, create an account, a Hotmail account or an Outlook.com account, and then you follow the instructions there. And then what they'll do is they'll send a notification to our compliance team to give you permission to get that data. And then once you do, it's again another portal. You log into it, you get data like the volume of mail you sent there, what your complaint rates are, what your bounce rates are. I think that one can be confusing. We have head to desk many times looking at Microsoft SNDS data because it doesn't always make sense with what we're seeing. The Google Postmaster tool data is a lot more reliable. So if you're going to pick one of the two, I would certainly go with the Google Postmaster tools. Also on the sender side, there are some tools that you can use. And again, we have a set of tools by Validity, again, the company that bought ReturnPath that did Sender Score, where we just are a reseller for those tools. A seed list tool where you can send your content to a seed list, a list of addresses that are owned by Validity. So as an ESP, we can only tell you if messages got delivered or not. Beyond that, we can't tell you what happened with the message. So the seed list tool helps to kind of fill that void with regards to inbox placement versus spam folder placement. And that's a good, especially if you look at data in aggregate, trending data, you can really start to see what you can get an idea of what your reputation is at those different providers. Also pulling that data in and kind of comparing it to what you see with your real world data in your Marketo instance can be helpful. Content rendering tool, I talked about that a minute ago. We call it content and design in the tool set. The tool set is called Everest. So content rendering, again, you can send it's almost like a litmus or an email on acid if you guys have used those tools. It's essentially the same thing. You send your content to the tool as you're designing new content or developing new templates to see how it's going to render in various email engines. Another piece to that is they will do a spam check. They'll run it through some of the spam filters. There's an option to do that, so you can get an idea there, kind of what the inbox placement might look like there, or if you've got issues with the email. And then finally, reputation monitoring is a module that you can add onto your deliverability tools where you can monitor your domain or your IPs, see if you're hitting any of those spam traps that I referred to earlier. So that can also be helpful. I meant to check Yahoo. They've changed so much over the past few years. They were Yahoo and AOL and Verizon, and then Verizon bought those two domains, and then they were Verizon Media for a while, and then Verizon sold them off again. So now they're back to Yahoo. So Yahoo is Yahoo and AOL now. I think they still do the Verizon email though, but I'm not sure where they are in their tools in their tool set. So I need to follow up with that. But they've had at least a Postmaster page over the years. They've kind of shifted off and on as to whether or not they have any useful user specific data that you can get from there. So you could probably check that one out as well. And then also too, you could Google reputation, email reputation. Some of the other providers like security companies and things, they have their own websites. So there's a whole host of ways to take a look. But again, unfortunately, there's just not a one-stop shop for that. That's reputation. All right, we also get questions about deliverability reporting. What do you use for reporting? So I have the luxury of having some behind the scenes tools that I can use. If I'm trying to troubleshoot deliverability issues, I have a tool that I can essentially pull in all the log data from your instance and create various reports. But in Marketo, I regularly use the email performance reports in analytics. So go to analytics, go to email performance, and then looking at the delivered percentage, the open percentage, the click to open percentage, super important, super helpful. The great thing too about this tool, the data here it can be helpful. You can also, if you have our tool set, and I promise I'm not trying to sell you guys on our tool set. I wish all of our clients had our tools, but there are additional things that you can do with our tool set in conjunction with the analytics. So for example, one of the things that tools can do for you is, especially if you're heavy on the B2B side, you send to a lot of B2B domains, the tool has what's called an optimizer feature where you can upload your list to the database and it gives you an output to show you what percentage of your list uses the different providers that within the tool, especially on the seed list piece. Where that becomes helpful is, it's not super helpful on the B2C side, right? If you need to see what your Gmail audience is, you just pull a smart list for every email address that includes @gmail.com, right? Pretty easy. But if you wanted to pull a report for anyone that uses Office 365, you can't do that by just looking at email addresses, right? Like you can't look at my address or Michael's address to see who Adobe uses. We use Office 365. The tool would tell you that. So you upload your list, it analyzes it, gives you the output, what percentage each provider represents in your database. But at the next level, it can give you a list of all the domains under that provider that use that provider. So where that becomes helpful in reporting is you can then pull that list of, because you can extract that data into a spreadsheet. You can then pull the data, a list of domains for Office 365, go back into the tool set, create a smart list for your Office 365 domains, then run that report and see what your deliverability, what these numbers look like for Office 365 specifically. So you can dig in deeper provider by provider to see, what your engagement rates look like, because you don't want to use the seed list data as the end all be all, right? You want to, it's just seed data, so it can be, it's not a live audience. So the performance you see there can be different. And so using that data as just one piece of the puzzle, and then going back into Marketo to try and use your live data to confirm that can be key. I do it all the time for clients to kind of prove out whether or not they've got inbox placement issues, for example. So that's deliverability reporting within Marketo. And then finally, we get a lot of questions about Apple's mail privacy protection, or MPP. I'm going to be honest, right? There's an article here. You can see it was last updated October 2021. Nothing earth-shattering has really changed since then. So don't think that we've just neglected that content. I have the link here. This is a really helpful article, can be really helpful for you, specific to Marketo. It can show you how you can report on this, how you can kind of isolate what might be clicks from the or opens from the MPP. For those of you who don't know, a couple of years ago, Apple introduced this mail protection program, and what it does is it can artificially inflate your open rates at a high level. So anyone that gets mail there, opens it up, it can look like the mail. It can look like everyone that looks at their email in an iOS device shows as an open. So those open rates can be artificially inflated. We get lots of questions about this, but what I'm gonna be completely honest with you about this. We really haven't changed our what we do or the way we do things since this came out. The opens are going to be up. They may not be as reliable, but they're still, those opens, those clicks are really the important factors specific to email that help us to understand what's going on with the customers email program with their reputation. And so we just really haven't made a lot of changes around it. So I know that's not huge news for you guys. That's not the big update that you might be hoping for, but hoping just to let you know that maybe not try to maybe relieve a little bit of the angst around this. It is what it is. I mean, the industry is trying to make it as hard as possible they're trying to protect their users, but it's also becoming harder and harder for us to kind of isolate what's going on with individual users. So we don't, we just have to do the best that we can. Earlier, before this came out, I would regularly tell clients that if you're interested in whether or not a customer is engaged or not, from an email perspective, only focus on the email metrics, because that's all that email provider is going to have access to with regards to data. So for example, if you considered someone engaged because they visited your website, if it wasn't via a link in an email, the mailbox provider doesn't have access to that data. So if they haven't engaged with your email in a while, the mailbox provider is not going to consider that user to be engaged. Today, I don't want you to put a lot of emphasis on that non-email engagement data, but it's something that you could certainly look at to determine whether or not someone's engaged. If you're trying to repair a deliverability issue, or if you're going through an IP warm-up process, things like that, I still wouldn't rely on that non-email data, but it's something that you may want to start factoring in a little bit as you look at other things that you're doing with your email program. So that's all I got at this point on MPP. But again, this is a good article to take a look at. It's got some really helpful information if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. I think that's it. Is that all I got at this point? Yeah, Q&A. All right, so lots of questions in there. So let me pull that up and start from the top. Let's see. Okay. Veronica, you asked for a dedicated IP, do we help with warm-up? So yes. So if you purchase a dedicated IP address, we require that you purchase what we call a launch pack. And what that launch pack does is it pairs you with someone on our team to walk you through this process. So we have an initial kickoff call with you. It's about an hour long where we step through the whole process. Before that call, we send you some discovery questions, make sure we get a good understanding of your mail program, your email volumes, all that good stuff. And then we give you kind of the framework for building your warm-up process. So take a step back here. Warm-up, what that means is, I talked about IP reputation earlier. When you move to a dedicated IP address at Marketo, the IP address that you get is going to be, it's not pre-warmed. It doesn't have a reputation associated with it. So you need to build a reputation. What that reputation does, we want to build a positive reputation. What that positive reputation does is it helps to get your mail delivered. And if you and so that new IP will have a neutral reputation. So if you have the positive reputation, allows you to get mail delivered, but at that neutral reputation, you're not going to be able to send as much mail as you would necessarily like to right out of the gate. So you have to build a plan that starts you at lower volumes and then gradually increases your volume over time. And so we kind of walk you through that, give you the framework. You actually build the plan yourself, but we give you the framework for essentially how we would like you to do that, or how we think you should do that. The other thing to consider too is if you move from shared IPs to dedicated, just to keep in mind, is that once we get everything set up and we start that warm up, we move your instance from the shared IPs to the dedicated IP address. So what that means is you don't have the luxury of warming up the reputation of the dedicated IP while still sending off of the shared IP. Just from a technological perspective, we don't have the ability to do that. So you typically need to take a step back in your marketing program so that you can do this warm-up process. So if you're thinking about moving to a dedicated IP, think about where that might fit best into your marketing calendar, your yearly calendar. If you're leading up to an annual summit or some sort of large event, that may not be the best time, because you're going to typically ramp up your emails going out leading up to that event. So maybe sometime after that would be a better option. So just think about that as you're doing that. Also, to make sure, if we want to make sure that it's a good fit, a dedicated IP is a good fit for you. So typically what that means is if you send mostly to a B2C audience, that you send at least 100,000 emails a month. If you're B2C. If you're B2B, we can usually dial that back to about 50,000. The reason we recommend these limits is hitting those limits. That's where you typically you're on the radar of the mailbox provider that you're mailing to, and that's where you start to build that positive reputation that gives you that benefit of that reputation. Anything less than that, you're probably just going to be at that neutral reputation. Not to say that you can't send mail at lower volumes on a dedicated IP address. We just like to make sure that you are aware of that. If you decide to purchase a dedicated IP and you don't meet those minimums. What's the best practice for inactivity management at 3-6 months? That's a great question. So a couple things on that. I strongly suggest that you don't mail to anyone that hasn't engaged in a year or more. 6 to 12 months is kind of a gray area. I talked earlier about spam traps, and I talked about how some of the traps can be recycled or old addresses. It's that 6 to 12 month period where we might see addresses convert over to spam traps. So that's why it's really a bit of a gray area. Less than 6 months, you should be pretty good. What I will also recommend is, if you don't already use it, Marketo has what's called an email deliverability program in the Marketo program library. It's an operational program that you can download, and it can help you manage your bounces. It can also manage your chronic unengagers, or I forgot how we worded it, but people that aren't engaging with your email. You can use Marketo to have an automated program that's constantly keeping that up to date, so you don't have to worry about people that that are inactive. That just keeps the database fresh for you, so it can be really, really helpful. Is there a good way to see if mail is a spam trap? So, great question. So again, I mentioned earlier our tool set. You can add on the reputation module for that. We have access to a spam trap network as part of that. That trap network, however, shouldn't be causing you any deliverability issues, because it's not used for block lists or anything like that. It's just a reporting network. But what it does is it helps to point out issues that you may have in your overall data management hygiene process. Clients always ask us, hey, can you just tell us what those addresses are? I can't now. I could early when we had earlier versions of the tool, but that actually defeats the purpose. If you go in and just delete out the email addresses that are spam traps in our reporting network, it's actually doing you a disservice, because really what we want you to do is address the behavior that's causing you to hit those spam traps, so that you can get the traps out of your database that are in the real world. So the two things that are really important here really can be addressed by that email deliverability program. Is one, making sure that you're processing your bounces, especially your soft bounces. And that can be really important for those recycled traps. Typically, those recycled traps, you will have seen legitimate engagement data for quite a while, and then a lot of times you'll get some sort of bounce, like mailbox is full for a long time, or mailbox is suspended, or you may even get a more technical bounce, like they couldn't find the mail server, or they couldn't find the domain. So having that will help to get that address out of your database before it becomes a trap. And then the second thing is, once the traps are in your database, looking for lack of engagement. Typically, spam traps aren't going to engage with your email. Not to say they won't ever, but the more legitimate, larger spam trap networks don't engage. They just are, the mail's getting delivered there, and they're just reporting if people are sending email to the traps. So looking at engagement, looking at bounces are really the best way to try to get those folks out of your database. Avoid spammy words in the subject line. Yes, I would say over time that's probably become less important as reputation has kind of vaulted to the top. The spammy word things, sometimes you will get feedback in the tool set, in the content and design of some things you might want to avoid, but really reputation is really the ultimate there. if you get your IP blacklisted, do you also need to worry that the envelope could be an issue? That's a great question. Yes, the envelope is typically tied to the IP, especially for us. So it could be, but a lot of times it depends on the block list too. Like, so for example, spam cop is a block list that typically will block on IPs, typically based around if you've hit a spam trap in their network. But the good thing about the blocks at spam cop, they last 24 hours and then they fall off. And unless there's an issue in that 24-hour period, that really starts that 24-hour clock over again. So typically you're not going to get the envelope. I think you're going to get the IP blacklisted more than you are the envelope, but the envelope can become important in the reputation and just in the reputation piece. And also too, that's one of the benefits when I talked about the dedicated IP address. We customize, as part of that process, we customize the envelope from there so that it would be unique to you when you're on the shared IPs. As I mentioned earlier, you're sharing the domain of that envelope with everyone else on the shared IPs. What is the friendly from? So that is when you're creating your content in Marketo. There's that one screen where you choose the from name, you choose the from address, you choose the reply to address, you set the subject line. If you've got multiple link branding domains, there's a drop down where you choose that top line where you just type in a name. That's your friendly from. So that's typically, again, if you think about your email, when you get your email in your inbox, if you get an email from me, most email clients are just going to show that it's Sean Wirt, not wirt@adobe.com. Some show both, but you're more than likely going to see that friendly from in there. So that's what the friendly from is. IT is your best friend here. I think, Veronica, that was in regards to authentication. Absolutely. They're definitely going to be your friend there. Should everyone have a dedicated IP? Kind of talked about that. One thing I did forget to mention there is how frequently you send mail. Do you send at a pretty steady cadence? Or do you have wild spikes in your volume periodically? So if you don't send that frequently, if you have these wild spikes every 6 months or so, even though you hit that volume, the dedicated IP may not be a great fit for you. So just keep that in mind. I want every client where it makes sense to get a dedicated IP because you have the full control. You always have control of your domain. But you don't have control of the IP reputation if you're on shared IPs. Again, we have a compliance team that works to manage that, but those blocks do come up, and it could likely to just be at the worst time possible for you to get a spam cop block on your instances. How do you find your Marketo IP, Michael? That's a link to the article on how to find that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. There. This is helpful. Okay. What's the worst thing that could happen if you send to a lot of spam traps, and what's the worst that's happened? I mean, really, the worst thing is going to be that you're going to get added to block lists, right? The worst one you can get on is Spam House. They're the big guys. Almost every major email provider, hosting provider, filter provider subscribes to the Spam House block list. You've done something really, really wrong if you get on the Spam House block list, but just know that nothing is irreversible, right? So you can always fix issues. We have clients all the time that are on a dedicated IP, and they ask if they can just switch to a new dedicated IP. We're not going to do that because we'll just burn through IP addresses, right? And there's a reason why there's an issue with that dedicated IP, and 99.9% of the time it's due to just something that you've done, whether it was on purpose or not. It's something that you've caused. So what we want you to do is fix that problem so that you can continue to use the IP that we've given you and that we've assigned to you. So just keep that in mind. What's the worst thing? I mean, it's really it's getting blocklisted, and if it's really bad, you can be on that block list for quite some time. But again, if you fix what you're doing wrong, a lot of times that's going to involve pulling us in us coming up with some sort of consulting engagement for you, we will we'll walk you through it, and we'll get you back to where you need to be. No guarantees, right? We always say there's no guarantees and deliverability, but we will. The guarantee is that we'll do what we can to get you where you need to be, so that you're back up and running. Great questions. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think there's one more about the text version of the email content. Is that recommended for keeping a good IP sender reputation?
We do recommend that you do have that text version. I don't think it's not nearly what it used to be. You know, almost every client out there now, email client, will process an HTML version. I try not to get too far in the weeds. You know, some people swear by the fact that they're going to get their text only version delivered. Look, if you want to go that route, that's fine, right? It's not. We don't see our job here as trying to figure out the best way around getting your mail delivered, right? We really want to preach on what best practices are. Reputation is really the key there. So you should have that text version, again, just because you might find some random, mail client out there that needs to use it. But I certainly wouldn't go that route trying to get around the spam filters. That's for sure.
That's great. Wow, that was a lot of useful content. I learned a few things today for sure. Thank you so much, Sean.
My pleasure.
One question I had, and this is just me being a little bit picky. I was checking on the Postmaster tools and wanted to double check with you if this is the link. Quickly sharing my screen, because I saw 2016 here and I'm like, is this still?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. It's weird they haven't. Yeah.
That's it. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to
use
use
that they haven't updated that. Yeah, it's great. You have to. Looks like someone set that up years ago there, probably, but you do have to set it up. So there is a little bit of, again, your IT team will need to do some DNS records. But if you don't have a domain in there, you'll get the instructions on how to do it. Since you guys already have a domain there, that's why the directions aren't showing up for you there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Very cool.
Okay, looks like we're at time. So glad I recorded this so we can share with everyone.
Very much.